The previous basket is under review.
Welcome back to Scout Team. It's episode 3 of the summer. We're rolling along. We talked about the Kansas Jayhawks and Darren Peterson last week. Check out that video on the Basket Under Review YouTube channel. This week, we're talking about the UConn Huskies and a team that will be kind of consensus in the top 5 or 10 in the country next year. A team that obviously has title expectations with what they've done in the past, and a team that has a lot of continuity, but brought in one huge fish in particular in the portal that I think will excite a lot of people. I'm Kevin Sweeney, Sports Illustrated. Eric Fawcett. I'm repping home field today. Friend of the Basket Under Review Network. Friend of all of our programming here. So shout out to home field as always. But Fawcett, man, this is a fun one. It's also a good example of even with guys who play a lot of high visibility games like a Silas Demory, who was in the SEC playing against the best players in the country, taking a step back in the summer and really taking stock of a guy on film can really, change your outlook a little bit on who a guy is and what they can be in a new system.
I think when it comes to the transfer portal and the way that most people talk about it, whether it be fans, media, coaches, there's so much discussion about how can you know if a mid-major transfer is going to transfer up? And yes, that is a legitimate question, but I feel like there's not enough discussion about how does a guy who played at a different high major team in an entirely different system, how does that translate? And honestly, Kevin, I'm not sure there's two different styles of play that could be, or two styles that could be much more different than Georgia and UConn. So I find that really interesting. I also find it really interesting because UConn was still a really good watch last year, in my opinion. I really enjoyed watching them play. And I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but you go back to their championship seasons and they had awesome players and they played awesome basketball. And then last year, I feel like they missed on some of their talent acquisitions, some of their portal additions, and they were almost fun to watch because their players weren't great. And honestly, I think one of the most enjoyable games of the NCAA tournament to watch was when they gave Florida a pretty good push. And watching that game, it just felt like Florida was more talented at every single position. And it was the style of play and the coaching of UConn that kept that game really competitive, to a point that Florida was sweating at some point. So even in a down year for UConn, I still feel like, to me, they reminded me that hey, we're still UConn. We're still here. We just need to not miss on some of our player acquisitions. And of course that leads us to today's discussion where we talk about their big piece here and talk about how it lands. And for people who were really watching the show last year, we had the same preseason UConn video where we talked about Aiden Mahaney. And you know what, Kevin, we were pretty, I don't know. I feel like we came away from that video with some major hesitancy about Aiden Mahaney and the fit, but I don't feel like we really stood in the paint enough. And of course, hindsight's 2020, but I think we're both man, I don't really think we do not like this at all, but it's UConn after 2 championships. Clearly they know what they're doing. And that is one of my great, that is one of the things that I look back on in last season that I have great regrets about is man, I wish we really stood in the paint after we did our video. So Kevin, I think at the end of this one, wherever we land, I think we have to really really put our heels in the sand and say, this is our take for UConn moving forward.
Yeah, look, I think last year there was a lot of okay, so they just had this guy, Cam Spencer, who was unbelievable and took huge strides in the UConn system and was a big time shooter. And he was a fiery white dude. And then comes this other fiery white dude to theoretically play Cam Spencer's role. It obviously did not work. It was a big reason, I think, why they flopped. Their point guard play, another concern, and we'll get into that obviously with Silas. But the same thing's going to happen to Silas Demory because not just he is theoretically the Tristen Newton of this group, right? He's the big physical point guard who can shoot off the dribble, who has is a transfer in, coming from not as big a winning situation into one where they expect championships, going into a much different offense. And with Tristen, obviously there were some growing pains, but when it hit, he was one of the best players in the country, won the Bob Cousy Award, was an All-American level player. And so I do think it'll be interesting to lay out some of those comparisons. And, I think Fawcett, the playmaking is probably something that I was curious about, but overall, I think you see a little bit more of that with Demory on film than you might have on the stats. So that's valuable, but I think it all starts with their size and physicality, their ability to get downhill. I think that has made them the players they are.
Yeah, I think that's when you start looking at what made Newton so effective. Obviously, he could really execute in that style that UConn likes to run, with so much off-ball action, so many sets on the same play. But when things kind of broke down, or if they ever needed, he just had this way of getting to the hoop no matter what. On all these plays, it looks like the defender's in a good position. They got their chests in front of the ball, and Newton just always had that way of just getting 2 more dribbles out of it, putting his shoulder and creating just a little bit more space. And he just seemed to be creating these buckets out of nowhere. And of course, that's what made UConn feel unstoppable, because they could either score in structure or out of structure. Now, Silas Demory, I think, has a lot of that to his game as well. And we'll look at the way he's guarded in some clips later, but there was so much that he had to create for himself. There was not a lot of sets that UConn or that Georgia was using that made things easy on Silas Demory. He had to go out and create everything. And still in these clips, there's so many times where it's like, okay, defender's in a good position. He just keeps that dribble alive. He keeps pushing towards the rim and he keeps finishing. So I see a lot of comparisons there. But of course, it wasn't just like brute force and individual talent for Newton. He was such a good passer. I feel like that's something I didn't even give him enough respect for, is his just like touch and the way he looked so connected to his cutters and his rollers. He would throw them open with some of these lobs like a quarterback would. I really think that some of this passing was almost underrated. And Demory's got a little bit to that game, but, as you watch him hit that short roll, good pass, but it's a little bit mechanical. He doesn't have that kind of same real fluidity of a Newton. He doesn't have quite the same level of flash. He finds a way, but again, it's usually like he takes 1 or 2 more dribbles to find it. It eventually gets there. And again, I think that that's something where he could probably get, maybe still a little bit better, but within that Georgia offense, there was not a lot of opportunities for him to make kind of flashy plays. And I think that this is something that, again, Newton had just this creativity to him. Look at him spin in the air, still find a shooter right in the hands. There's a little bit of that to Demory too, where he can just find a way once he sees a trap, he sees a second defender, he uses that reverse pivot. He has some of that creativity that I just don't think was really shown with Georgia, because that was just, again, an offense that was a lot more of a slog and not something where a player where things were made easy for Demory, or where he was put in positions where he could show some of that creativity.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember the first time I watched Tristen Newton in person, and it was at actually at the PK 85, and that was really the start of the UConn wagon. Those 2 years was them dominating that tournament, and Tristen wasn't even playing great at that point, but you just watched him, and he had this weird flow about him, like he had a way of like naturally keeping you off balance as a defense because of the way that he put the ball on the floor. Like, for whatever reason, like the pacing and everything was just not quite traditional, and he had a way of just kind of wiggling his way to the rim, and it became a huge part of their offense, as you said. And I don't necessarily know that Silas has that level of wiggle, but they both have the same ability to put their head down and get to the rim without making a ton of mistakes with careless turnovers, charges, etc. Silas Demory was like a nearly 50% free throw rate type of guy. Like he can get to the line in bunches, and I think UConn's offense last year was so reliant on solo ball to go create offense late in games, and even him, he's a guy who you want to run off actions more so than just roll it up the court and let him go play at the top of the key. Hassan Diarra was a great glue guy, but he wasn't the point guard, alpha creator. And Caravan is certainly not like a number one offensive option. I think we've learned that here over the last couple of years. And so just having someone, I think, late in games that they feel like they can rely on to go generate offense without having to run a set, or if things get blown up and the shot clock winds down. I think that value with Demory goes probably pretty far beyond even what the numbers will suggest his impact on this UConn team is.
Yeah, and that's something too, where again, as you look about the different fit between a Georgia and a UConn, and what's being asked out of their point guards. I kind of feel like with UConn, it's often the first 6 seconds are us as a team. Then then we get into our secondary, like, hey, the action, the next 12 seconds is for us as a team. And then after that, it's someone go create and make something happen. And I do think they will be looking to play a lot faster this year. Of course, that's, take a shot if you're so inclined to hear and coaches talk about playing faster in the offseason. But that's something where Demory has that ability to play up tempo, or if you need someone to get something with the at the end of the shot clock when things slow down, he can do that. And that is almost one of the things where playing at Georgia, where offense was a slog, some of those reps might even turn out to be valuable for Demry. And again, I think you saw those in some of those initial clips.
Yeah, and look, his numbers, he only averaged, I think, 3.1 assists per game, and out of high school was very much seen more as a combo guard than a true point. And so I think there were some real questions from people when he signed to UConn. Like, is this guy like a on-ball alpha? Like, is he a guy who's anchoring an offense, or is he a scorer who can create a little bit? And I think, when you dove into it, especially Fawcett, the things you notice about the way he was defended, the way the Georgia offense run, those really inhibited his ability to go stack up assists. But there's some real playmaking juice there, I think.
Yeah, I think to start, when you're kind of picking up, hey, is this guy a point guard? Is he a combo guard? And again, trying to label guys with positions nowadays is kind of a fool's errand. But let's look at the way that Demory looks when he gets the ball. Look at the way his head's up. He's not going at 100 miles per hour. And in a situation there where he could have taken the ball out of the way of the rim, he got a paint touch and he found a shooter in the corner. Same thing here. Could take on a player one-on-one, waits up a little bit, waits for that rim runner, and his head's up constantly in transition as he looks to push the ball. Like, this looks like a point guard to me. Sees his shooter open on the opposite wing. Maybe could have made an easier pass to the shorter wing, but he found the guy he really wanted to take the shot, and he found them. We talked a little bit about pushing the ball up the floor, not dribbling across half in the last video. Here's an opportunity where, again, he takes it to just about half, sees his rim runner, and makes a tough pass. Instead of pushing this one, taking 100 more dribbles, sees Blue Cane streak in the wing and pushes it. Like, this looks like point guard play to me. So I've been pretty impressed there. And Kevin, this is where we do have to talk about Georgia's kind of offense once more. It is remarkable watching the clips of Silas Demory and seeing how every single team, even teams that were drop teams lots of times, were like, we are going to blitz and hedge and trap Silas Demory because they wanted to dare anyone else on Georgia's roster to beat them. So watch the way he handles these pressures. Watch as he either keeps his dribble alive or gets to a controlled jump stop, uses his pivot, and makes the next best action every single time. So again, this is something where you look at it and a lot of combo guards, a lot of shooting guards, you put them in situations like this, they are not going to handle things as comfortably. This is another reason why I think that his assist numbers were not particularly good, because teams were just forcing it out of his hands and trying to make Georgia take 2 or 3 passes to beat them. And when you see just how resolute teams were about trying to get the ball out of Demory's hands, you can start to see why it wasn't conducive to him putting up big assist numbers. But also, as you watch a lot of these really good defensive teams, really good hedging bigs going out and trying to take the ball out of his hands, he's always making really good decisions. And again, to me, that kind of speaks to his point guard ability. So I came away from a lot of this really, really high on his ability to be that kind of traditional point guard. And as we talk about the fit at UConn, we know that UConn has a really complex offense, and a lot of it is shooters coming off pin downs, staggers, flares. There wasn't a lot of that in Georgia's offense, but the opportunities that he did have creates a great angle, hits Blue Cane in the hands for an easy shot. Same thing here. This is actually the same play. Got to know the scout. Dribbles down to the baseline. Big moment against Florida, and he makes a perfect pass on time, on target, and it results in a bucket. See a little bit of that here. Again, this is not UConn level complexity, but when it came to hitting a shooter on time, on target, right in that shooting pocket so you could put it up, he was able to do that. And honestly, Kevin, I think that's just where my biggest question lies. Georgia is not a team that runs a lot of sets. They do not run high-level action. Silas Demory is now going to UConn, where they run the arguably highest level stuff at the high major level. Yeah. How does that affect Demory? Is this a huge learning curve? That's going to be the big question I have.
Yeah. And look, I think it was for Newton, right? I mean, the story's been kind of told, but in January when UConn was struggling in that first title run, a lot of that blame went on Newton, and it was like, is he the guy? Is he the guy holding us back from pushing for a championship? It's crazy to think about that now, being one of the most decorated point guards really in a generation of college basketball. But at the time, that was like a very real concern. And I do worry, especially with the schedule that they play. They will have some big time challenges. Just how quickly does all of this come? And how much patience does Dan Hurley give him if the sets aren't running smoothly? Like, he wants to he wants to break stuff off and just kind of play downhill. Like, how much will Dan Hurley allow that to happen? How much will he want to go to someone like Malachi Smith, who they have as a backup point guard from Dayton, who's a high level passer, a guy who's been around a lot of winning. It's going to be an adjustment for him too. But if Malachi picks up the offense faster, I think there's a world where maybe he ends up having a bigger role early in the year. But I do think the ceiling for UConn is pretty predicated on Silas Demory and him being as good as advertised. I will note he was unbelievable down the stretch last year. I mean, the final 10 games of the year, he was willing Georgia to everything they got, averaged over 19 points a game in that stretch. And I talked to a coach in the SEC a couple of months ago about this, right when he went in the portal, and he was like, look, like, I was a Demory skeptic for the majority of his 2 years, and this February and March, he was just he moved me in a way that, like, you just very few guys do at this level. It is very hard to find guards at his of his caliber in the portal, and UConn was certainly able to get one. And I do think, just to kind of close the book on the learning curve thing, I think one way that any player can earn the good graces of a head coach early on, a new head coach, is on the defensive end. UConn needs some help on that end of the floor. They were not good last year defensively, and some of the personnel with Ball and Caravan, who were part of that, that still remains. And so having someone that they felt like could guard the ball, it was going to be important. And I think of Demory as a very good on-ball defender, and someone who I think can add some value there with his physicality and his willingness to compete on that end.
Yeah, while I didn't really like the way that Georgia played on the offensive end, I thought they were tremendous defensively, and I thought that Demory setting the tone was a big part of that. And you can see the way that he's able to just stick with these really talented SEC guards as they try to dance, as they try to use screens. He's just able to keep his feet in front of the ball and be really disruptive with his hands. And that was something too. You watch all these clips, it's all against really talented guards. Walter Clayton gets it poked away. We saw Jeremiah Fears before struggling, and he's got this ability to create turnovers as well that I love. It's just his timing here. As guys try to throw hook passes over him, he just has this ability to put both of his hands up and constantly pick the exact moment he needs to leave his feet to get a steal. Again, Elijah Martin goats him into that pass, pokes it away. It's really fun stuff to watch. I find it really impressive. And again, it's something that I think he can kind of be really good just guarding the ball, like here, just keeping his feet in front of a talented scorer, getting to a spot first. It's really impressive. So he can play just, hey, keep your feet in front of the ball defense. He can also play, hey, go and get a steal. And if he's going to get switched on to a bigger player, he loves to battle. And I just think Dan Hurley is going to be fired up watching these clips of him getting switched willingly onto much bigger players, willing to fight, willing to be physical, and in many cases drawing fouls due to the way he's so pesky against these bigger players. But again, defensively, a place that UConn could probably use a little bit more feistiness at the point of attack. I mean, I think Silas Demory is the guy for that.
Yeah, I love him on that end. I really do. I think his ability to just give them an edge, and I think just raise their compete level, I think will be important. And look, I think they're a much deeper team than they were last year, which is a huge value add. But I think what it allows them to do is create kind of the culture that they had 2 years ago of accountability, and have guys that can come off the bench and change games. Didn't have it last year. I think the depth overall that they've added, I think, helps someone like Demory play as hard as he does on that end of the floor defensively. And so, really excited about that marriage. Look, I think the concerns are valid, right? I think there's a world where he turns it over too much. There's a world where he takes time to adjust to the system. I think both of those would be if this fails, it's probably why. But I find the film pretty compelling from down the stretch of the season, just like that SEC coach who I was talking with said. And I think, he is certainly probably the biggest contributor to a high ceiling UConn group this year, a title level ceiling for UConn. Obviously, they bring in Braylon Mullins, who I think is a big time shooter, and gives Demory a ton of weapons. I mean, you're not going to be able to trap him the way that Georgia, teams did to Georgia, because if you've got Braylon Mullins and Solo Ball and Alex Caravan out there, and you're willingly putting yourself into rotations, I mean, good luck. And that is a scary proposition. They've got all these guys that add the depth, but like for them to hit the ceiling, I think it's all about Demory. I believe in him. I'm curious where you land and if you're willing to plant the flag on this one after maybe we came up a little short last year.
Yeah, I just did not have enough conviction last year after doing the Aiden Mahaney, and after even 20 minutes of you and me talking about how it was maybe not the best fit, and we didn't think it was going to work out. We never just like really planted our flag. So I will do this after this comment. I mean, I watch a lot of the NBA pre-draft content that teams put out, and NFL as well, where they ask players to diagram different plays or explain different concepts as they try to get a grasp of their basketball IQ. I would be fascinated if like Luke Murray and some of the members of that UConn staff were doing that with prospective guards, particularly in the portal, because that's really the only thing that I think could potentially stand in the way is can he grasp this UConn system after what he did at Georgia? And I'm not even suggesting he can. It's just like an incomplete in my mind because he just didn't have the opportunities to showcase those abilities or lack thereof. So that's kind of the one concern for me. But after really pouring over the film for this video, I have to say I just love his ability to play with a little bit more pace. I love his ability to get downhill and get paint touches. I think he's a better passer than he showed. And if nothing else, he's going to be defensively so solid that he could stay on the floor even through some of the other problems if he has them. So I am a big fan. I'm going to declare this to be a great portal get for UConn. I'm expecting a big season from him. And if he has a big season, that means UConn's going to have a big season. And I definitely see them in that Final Four mix.
Gun to your head, 100 days to college basketball. Maybe we'll see if maybe we'll do a St. John's video. We certainly could before the season, but right now, UConn or St. John's in the Big East.
Maybe recency bias of just watching, just doing this video. But hey, I'm gonna ride that recency bias. Give me UConn.
Man, you stole it from me. I was hoping we'd have a split. I'm taking UConn as well right now, but I think it's close. I think those two teams will be an incredible battle of styles to watch, especially if this offense is as supercharged as I think as I think it might be. So this was a fun one. We will be back next week with more. Again, please chime in on the Discord or in our DMs if you have a topic you really want to hear about or a team you really want to talk about. We're happy to take some requests here as we roll closer to college hoops. We're under 100 days, folks. No better place to check everything out than the Basketball Review Network, and the Discord is a lot of fun. So we'll see y'all next week. Appreciate you tuning in.